Hey, do you remember Super Mario Bros? It was a game about a plumber who didn't plumb anything, who ate some mushrooms and murdered other ones, while the cloud smiled in tacit approval of your fungal genocide. There were small turtles and a big turtle that left an axe in plain view that would instantly kill him, but it was okay, cause he came back from being burned alive, no worse for wear. Most importantly, do you remember how no one really asked much about the hows and whys of all this? Because we generally accepted that the game was bright and upbeat and most importantly, fun. How quaint those days now seem, as you watch the life drain out of a man's face while you slowly drag yourself through a torrent of despair and misery before finally reaching something that resembles an ending. But enough about The Last of Us 2's development. Let's talk about the game itself. Ha ha ha. Every so often a game comes out that is so relentlessly miserable and joyless that arguments crop up over whether such a game could actually be good. It's hardly a new argument. We've been having it since around the inception of the survival horror genre, and arguably even earlier. The discussions have had a lot of staying power because it is genuinely intriguing and cuts to the heart of what you think games should be about, after all. For the longest time, video games were generally perceived as being about colorful romps that provided a consistently positive gameplay loop that didn't question the often messed up activities you were partaking in. And on top of having a dark plot and setting, should a game really discourage players from enjoying themselves when that is theoretically the point of gaming? A movie can get away with being emotionally draining and postmodernist, so to speak, but a movie is only obliged to be like 2 hours long. Your average AAA console game nowadays is 10 hours long minimum, and I can see how it would get exhausting to have to deal with an experience that is not only bleak, but knows that it's bleak, and almost seems to mock you for trying to have fun with it. Well, if you read the video's title, you already know which camp I land in. Truth is, while I do like my Super Mario Bros., I've always been into games that aren't about having fun in the more quote-unquote traditional sense. I list games like Silent Hill and Hellblade among my favorites of all time. Games that are dark, dreary, miserable, and fun, shockingly enough. Well, fun in a certain sense at least. Call it fun, call it engaging, use whatever adjective you want, but I enjoy my time with those sorts of games. The Last of Us 2 is hardly unique in how oppressive it is, but it provides a relevant springboard for a breakdown of why I, and presumably many others, enjoy games that seem to dare us to not enjoy them. Or, to provide a more concise thesis, why are miserable games still fun? Now, before I start the video proper, let me throw out a couple of disclaimers and acknowledgements. I'm not making this video in an attempt to convince you that my word is gospel, or that I'm uniquely qualified to provide some objective analysis of a game's merits. I'm just adding my voice to the discussion, that's all. And most importantly, I'm not thick. I am well aware that this game is incredibly controversial and that you can't try to make a video about it and refuse to offer your position on those divisive elements. Some of those elements are only tangential to the actual point of the video though, so tell you what, when I've finished making my main points, I'll end the video with my take on those parts of the game. Okay? Okay. To explain why I enjoy these kinds of games, I'm going to borrow, i.e. steal, a theory of game design that I haven't seen used much, not even by the man who actually wrote it. Yahtzee Croshaw, the man behind the Zero Punctuation series of game reviews, wrote an article in 2011, and later revised in 2013, describing how every game can be broken down into 3 base components: context, challenge, and catharsis. The 3C theory for short. It's weird that even he doesn't reference this theory much because I think it provides an excellent framework for explaining why games like The Last of Us 2 work. I'm going to leave links in the description for the 2 articles in case you want to read them yourself, but I'll briefly explain what each C means before going into how they apply to The Last of Us 2. Context refers to the plot and story, as you can imagine, but can also refer to everything from environment design to musical cues. For a very basic example, if I'm playing Mario Galaxy, I don't need Mario or Rosalina to tell me that Beach Bowl Galaxy is a tropically themed galaxy. As soon as I arrive, I can see the sand, the water, and the palm trees. I can hear the tropical music. No text box needed to pop up conveying this information to me. I know what kind of place I'm in. As for challenge and catharsis, I feel it works best if I explain them together. I'll use an example I think you can all buy into. You know Smash? You know Captain Falcon? If you do, then of course you're familiar with the Falcon Punch. It has 53 frames of startup, meaning that it takes about a second to actually execute the move. Doesn't sound like much, but in Smash time, a second is enough to drop the controller, make yourself some tea, come back, and press the shield button. The challenge involves reading your opponent's movements, positioning yourself, and accurately gauging if you have a second to spare and winding it up. The catharsis, as you can imagine, is actually being rewarded for overcoming the challenge and landing the attack. But it's more than that. It's a million little things in visual and audio design that actually help sell how powerful of a move it is. Catharsis can also be achieved by tying it to context rather than challenge, where all the emotions built up over the course of the game or a sequence are paid off, whether in the finale or otherwise. A game doesn't need a strong showing from all three of the C's to be good. Your average visual novel, for instance, obviously doesn't have much in the way of challenge unless you struggle with reading, but are very strong in the context department, and if they're good, should be emotionally cathartic in some way. Competitive Smash Bros, on the other hand, is bereft of all in-game context, but pushes the challenge of overcoming a tough opponent and the catharsis of finally winning.
Out with the backer and gets the win! The pop-off on the stage boards is out here!
The Last of Us 2, to finally get to the game the video's actually about, puts its dark and depressing context front and center, but utilizes challenge and catharsis to help the player see its grim plot through. And on the flip side, the challenge and catharsis are given some much needed spice by the strong context the game builds up. Let's go through the three C's one at a time, in order to appreciate how they all end up complementing one another. The game benefits from very clear context, arguably much more than the original game did. In the first one, you understood that you were escorting Ellie to a destination, which is the tentpole objective all the mini-plots are built around. Still, the why was deliberately obscured, and personally, my commitment to the Hazy Goal wavered as the game rolled out atrocity after atrocity. In the second game, however, we know exactly what we want to do and why we're doing it. In the first hour of the game, a, thing happens and we end up having some grievances with... oh, screw it. From here on out, there be massive spoilers. 3, 2, 1. Joel fucking dies! And not just dies, but gets horribly brutalized. And look, I'm not someone who was huge into the first game. I liked it, but was never head over heels for it or its characters. Still, as Joel died, I was like, damn, I played as that man for like 15 hours. You really just gonna kill him like that?
You're gonna fucking die!
The fuel for Ellie's revenge is crystal clear as we tear through our hit list of names and faces.
Look at their fucking smiles.
But speaking of playing as characters, context isn't just a series of events that happen. Unlike films, games have a few extra tools to draw players in. Naughty Dog has pulled this trick in a couple of games now, and I've always thought it was pretty clever. Very early in the game, we play as Abby, who at this point we know nothing about. The game obscures her role in the early plot, misleading you with some early dialogue about mundane interpersonal relationships and a vague goal.
What is going on with you?
Mel's pregnant.
Oh.
So as you play as her, you don't think much of it, especially as her segments largely involve fleeing zombies, a sympathetic plight. But as we reach the end of her gameplay section, the twist reveals itself as we find out she wants to kill Joel. All of a sudden, it comes crashing down. Wait, you made me play as her to do what? You almost feel betrayed by the game, which in my case strengthened my resolve to press on and carry out the revenge. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail about the minutiae of the plot, but at this point we have a firm goal: revenge. As we pursue this goal, Ellie's actions become more and more messed up, as she tortures a woman for information on where she can find some more people to murder. At this point, unless you're a massive Joel and Ellie fan, alarm bells should be going off in your head. Wow, I thought. This is getting freaking nauseating. And like with how you might have held a grudge against the game for making you lead Abby to Joel, you start to resent it for making you control a character that is becoming increasingly unhinged and taking more and more objectionable actions.
I'm not gonna fight you. Yes, you will.
To further build on the context, I would argue Seattle is the most cohesive and well-realized setting in a Naughty Dog game since the PS2 days. I don't mind Uncharted's globe-trotting or the original game's road trip feel, but since most of the game takes place in Seattle, we get a firm grasp on how hard the city has fallen, on the gang warfare going on how each faction enforces its control. I remember the first time I saw the scars hang and gut someone, and I was like, oh damn, this is messed up. Everything's messed up. This is where we need to pause on context and introduce the other two C's. After all, if you're focusing purely on the plot, you're probably wondering how on earth one can continue justifying playing the game. Seems like the best thing to do is put the controller down and walk away before things get even worse. But the game offers you a million little ways to feel successful before the next gut punch cutscene. If you're still watching the video past the spoiler warning, I'm gonna assume you've already played the game, or at least know what it's all about. So I'm not gonna bore you with a dry breakdown of what the gameplay entails. Suffice it to say that as a survival stealth action game thing, the challenges come in many different directions and the catharsis follows suit. Let's say you're in one of the many enemy encounters in the game. The very first challenge is assessing whether you want to completely duck the enemies or if you feel you have enough resources to directly confront the enemy's numbers. If the latter, then the next challenges are obvious. Lining up the crosshairs right, accurately dodging melee attacks, figuring out when it's safe to pop out of cover to take some shots as you get flanked by the surprisingly good enemy AI. The catharsis comes in landing the hits and watching the enemies go down as you move on to the next one, from watching your scavenged goods be put to proper use. If you go with the former route, however, the catharsis is a little more subtle. A lot of people don't mix well with stealth games, as getting around enemies isn't as viscerally satisfying as shooting them in the face, with all the visual and audio cues that come with shooting people in the face. But let me put it to you like this. There's the skill that comes with ducking and weaving by enemies, taking out only key targets as quietly as possible. There's a sort of smug satisfaction that comes with outwitting your opponent, but as you make it to the exit, you can also look at all the resources that you didn't expend, which you can now use in a later encounter or in a boss fight down the road. In a game that provides you with only a certain amount of supplies and ammunition, that's a catharsis of its own, if you ask me. Essentially, even as the story makes you go, oh no, there's a lot of moments in between that make you go, oh yes.
Got you, asshole!
The high points provided by the challenge and catharsis help act as a counterweight to the low points in the plot, and provide you incentive to see it out. Which isn't to say that the plot and characters don't feed into the gameplay, giving it some edge. There's the more ham-fisted attempts at making you feel bad for your kills as the enemies call out their fallen comrades' names. Though there are points where it feels like roll call at school with the frequency it happens. I like some of the more subtle touches, like the struggle on your character's face as they stealth kill an enemy. That's a neat way to integrate characterization into the moment-to-moment gameplay, or how a dog will nuzzle up to its former owner after you kill them. Fun in a kind of psychotic way, sure, but this is a pretty psychotic game, all things considered. But what's important is that if a game is going to tut-tut me for enjoying its violence, it better pay it off in some way, or to give me further reasons to feel bad for killing minor characters and mooks. I mean, come on, you put them there for me to kill, Naughty Dog. I just did what you asked me. I hate it when games like Uncharted or the new God of War draw attention to how messed up your characters are acting.
You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
But don't actually have the guts to punish them in any way, because players often take offense to their main character not getting a happy ending after a whole game's worth of overcoming challenges. The Last of Us 2, however, does have the guts to do so, which is unsurprisingly the most controversial part of the game. This is where catharsis melds with the context rather than the challenge. After spending hours and hours subtly
I'm pissed we couldn't talk to her. Yeah.
and not so subtly, painting the characters as unhinged at best, the game finally takes this idea to its logical conclusion and climax. And now we're getting to it. About halfway through the game, you switch to playing as Abby and get to know all the people you just ganked as Ellie. I've played games that attempt to get you to sympathize with the quote-unquote villains and retroactively make you feel like crap for killing them, like the original Nier. Never have I played one that goes into such excruciating detail about their backstories and interpersonal relationships, to the point that what I had assumed was just going to be an hour or two of additional context ended up being the entire second half of the game. And this is where my opinion gets controversial. Truth is, I enjoyed Abby's half of the game more than Ellie's. I felt like the writing was stronger in this part. The dynamic between characters were a bit more nuanced than Ellie and Dina's "I love you no matter how fucked up you become."
I made her talk. It's okay.
More importantly though, I feel this is the section of the plot that actually delivers on the original game's premise and theme, which is that good people can become bad under the right circumstances. Thing is, that premise was never fully paid off in the original, but the sequel goes well out of its way to force you into acknowledging that the supposedly faceless mooks and dastardly villains were indeed people with struggles and stories.
I don't want to fight over land that I don't give a fuck about anymore.
I personally like the idea of playing as a character who was a loved one of the various people I bashed in the face without a second thought. For me, it was cathartic for me to finally have a Naughty Dog game that points out what I had felt since the original Uncharted, that their protagonists are kinda effed up. Their justifications for mowing down enemies often flimsy at best. That said, I'm iffy on the last hour of the game. The fight in the theater looked like a final boss fight, and Ellie suffering from PTSD but finally acknowledging that vengeance wasn't worth giving up her life with Dina felt like a fine conclusion to the game.
Potato, potato, my little big potato. My potato, my potato. My little putty potato.
Just as Abby decided to not get revenge on Ellie for mowing down her entire social circle, I had hoped Ellie was on the same page. But no. She sacrifices her peaceful life for one more attempt at revenge. This is where the context the game had laboriously built up for 20 hours falls apart. After spending so much time detailing the conflict in Seattle and the parties involved, the game dumps you in California, and the last group of enemies you deal with are completely detached from everything we had just done. The challenge and catharsis are still intact, but I didn't know who I was fighting or why I should care. The game very lazily just makes them as monstrous as possible to not have to acknowledge the fact that it had just been preaching about how mooks have loved ones and stories and blah blah blah. You know what this reminds me of? I'm gonna throw up a spoiler warning for Breaking Bad. Skip to this time if you don't want to hear them. In the final stretch of Breaking Bad's plot, they suddenly introduce neo-Nazis out of nowhere because you don't have to justify anything. You can kill them by the hundreds and no one would bat an eye. All the carefully crafted gray versus gray conflicts of the preceding dozens of episodes go out the window as Walt's final confrontation is with a bunch of people who cannot possibly be better than him. That's what this final bit of The Last of Us feels like. It just felt super jarring. As for the final boss and its conclusion, I know a lot of people are super down on Ellie's decision to spare Abby because at the end of the day, she did horribly torture Joel before her face turn. I'm certainly not going to argue Abby was a saint or even a good person, period. For me though, I felt that after Ellie and Tommy had slaughtered her friends en masse,
Screw it. Let's
including a couple of good old torture sessions, they were pretty much square. Abby had already been in some slave death camp type thing for months at this point. I don't know how much more petty vengeance you need. If we're talking context and catharsis, it felt cathartic for the game and characters to finally acknowledge the revenge isn't satisfying theme and lay their weapons down. Allow me to theorize for a moment as to why people seem so down on the game. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, so feel free to tell me I'm wrong. I feel that if you were someone who loved the original game to bits, who loved Joel and Ellie to bits, you were probably the person most wounded by this game. The two leads are either dead or left miserable, while the person who killed Joel gets to live. You have to play as that very person for 10 hours, which felt like a particular slap in the face. For me, however, I'm quite happy that this series actually stuck to its guns and paid off its message of how every killer is a person with a story, and revenge is best not served at all. The original game would draw attention to how bad Joel was, but it never came full circle until now. I now see why this game was called Part 2. I feel this kind of plot and resolution is what the original needed to feel complete, to feel truly cathartic. Admittedly, I was also not someone who was enamored with the characters, and it kind of feels like this game was made specifically for me. Someone who liked the first game but didn't love it, who felt a little put off by the characters.
Do you know that? Joel crossed a lot of people. I don't see the point in guessing.
Seems like a weird demographic to cater to, but hey, I'm not complaining. I'm sure at this point I sound like Naughty Dog slipped me some cash to shill for this game. So before I end this video, let me be 100% clear. I may not be here but I'm sure as hell not here. I'd hardly say this game is a masterpiece, but the things I dislike are different than the things most people seem to dislike. Naughty Dog's PS3 and PS4 output have never fully clicked with me, and I feel it comes down to how inorganic their games feel. There were times in this game where my support character would clear some rubble for me to be able to crawl through a passage, but the game would put up an invisible wall until my partner went through first.
Through here.
Or when I would have to boost my partner up somewhere and they would complete some challenge while I sat on my ass and watched.
One advantage of being pregnant. Low center of gravity.
Or when my partner got in my frickin' way in a tense moment and got me killed. How many times is Naughty Dog going to ask me to press triangle at a heavy door or ledge and wait for my partner to wake the hell up and register that I actually want to progress? As a gamer, I want to be proactive, but the game's overly scripted set pieces would often ask me to sit down and shut up until it ran through its intended sequence. This isn't challenging, and this isn't cathartic. It's all context and nothing else. And speaking of context, while I have some nitpicky things to say about a lot of the writing, like how Naughty Dog has clearly attended the Joss Whedon school of dialogue, i.e. every character has to be a snarky a-hole even if they're on a quest for bloody revenge.
Menorah decorations on the wall. It's a Jewish thing. And two, I didn't burst into flames just now, so... Burst into flames? It's just a dumb joke. Oh, unlike your other ones.
There's a glaring hole in this game's setting. You notice how during all this rambling, I used the word zombie exactly once before this. Yeah, the zombie part of the series has completely faded into the background. They're just a part of the environment at this point, a minor hazard akin to the endless series of broken or barred doors and gates. They have absolutely nothing to do with the cycle of revenge plot or the characters' internal struggles and interpersonal relationships. They play zero role in the game's climax. They've become an entirely vestigial part of the series. It's just kinda weird how little they matter. But anyway, let me end this video by saying something extremely pretentious and presumptuous. Right now, this game is a magnet for hate, especially for those who bought the game expecting the Joel and Ellie show, but I suspect this won't always be the case. I'm willing to bet that this game will be the Majora's Mask or Metal Gear Solid 2 of this generation, a sequel to a highly beloved title that simply refused to give the fans what they thought they wanted, and were largely hated for years after release for the extreme liberties they took with the gameplay and story. I think in time, though, people will come back around and appreciate the game for what it tried to do. I really do. It might take a whole decade, as was the case for Zelda and MGS, but I think it'll happen. It's a big claim, but we'll see how it plays out. Anywho, that's my piece. Let me know in the comments how dumb I am for actually liking this game. Oh, and one last thing. This girl who plays Hotline Miami on her Vita might be the single most relatable character in the game. And it's a shame that you reward her for her fantastic taste with a shiv to the throat. R.I.P. Vita girl.